Blanche Taylor Moore turns 90 years old Friday and will do so at the North Carolina Correctional Institution for Women in Raleigh. Tonight, we're hearing from the man who found the evidence that Blanche Moore was a killer.
The shocking truth was revealed too late. A beloved churchgoer, a doting grandmother, was hiding a sinister secret. Blanche Taylor Moore, the oldest woman on America's death row, poisoned the men closest to her with arsenic over decades. How did this silent serial killer manage to deceive everyone? Stay tuned as we unravel the twisted case of Blanche Taylor Moore, the Black Widow, whose crimes shocked the nation and left an unforgettably chilling trail of death behind her. Hey there, welcome back. In today's video, I will take you through the timeline of the life of Blanche Taylor Moore, also known as the Black Widow. We'll uncover how this seemingly sweet, church-going grandmother turned into the oldest woman on America's death row, convicted for poisoning the men closest to her with arsenic. From the mysterious deaths of her first husband and father, to the affair that led to more fatalities, and finally, her shocking trial and conviction, this is a story you won't want to miss. As we dive into this chilling case, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is there. We love hearing from our global audience. Also, if you haven't subscribed yet, please do so. Your support helps us bring more incredible stories like this. And if you haven't subscribed, we'd love to hear why in the comments so we can improve. Now, let's jump into the dark truth behind Blanche Taylor Moore's crimes. Blanche Taylor Moore was born on February 17, 1933, in Concord, North Carolina, into a family marked by dysfunction and instability. The oldest of 3 children, Blanche grew up in a household dominated by her father's alcoholism and erratic behavior. Parker Davis Kaiser, her father, held a respectable position as an ordained Baptist minister, but his personal life was far from ideal. Behind closed doors, he struggled with serious issues, including his alcoholism and a pattern of unfaithfulness to his wife. Blanche later recalled her father's cruelty, and she claimed that he forced her into harmful situations, allegedly to pay off his gambling debts. While these claims are difficult to verify, they paint a picture of a childhood filled with neglect and emotional abuse. Blanche's mother, Flanny Blanche Kaiser, was often a passive figure in this chaotic environment. She endured her husband's behavior in silence, and Blanche witnessed the emotional toll it took on her mother. This created a household full of tension, where Blanche learned to hide her emotions and protect herself from the turmoil around her. These formative years, characterized by fear, manipulation, and a lack of emotional support, had a deep effect on Blanche. Blanche quickly learned to adapt to her surroundings. She developed a knack for presenting herself in ways that suited the situation, whether it was as a sweet religious daughter at church or as someone who could manipulate others when necessary. She became highly skilled at hiding her true feelings and creating an image that masked the deep emotional scars from her upbringing. These traits would play a pivotal role in her life, shaping her actions in ways that would later lead to a dark and unsettling legacy. Blanche's childhood, defined by manipulation and survival, laid the foundation for the choices she would make as an adult. James Napoleon Taylor, Blanche's first husband, was a Korean War veteran who worked as a furniture restorer. They married in 1952 and built a family together, having 2 children. To the outside world, James was a steady, reliable man, and the couple seemed to have a typical suburban life. They lived in Burlington, North Carolina, and James was known for his quiet demeanor and hard-working nature. But beneath the surface, something darker was at play. In 1973, tragedy struck when James suddenly passed away at the age of 45. His death came as a shock to family and friends, especially considering his seemingly healthy lifestyle. Doctors quickly ruled his death as a heart attack, a common diagnosis for men of his age. His family, devastated by the loss, had no reason to question the doctor's verdict. Life moved on, and James was buried, with his death considered to be just another sad part of life. Years later, however, the cause of James' death would be called into question. When authorities began to investigate Blanche more closely, they exhumed the bodies of her past partners and relatives. This was when a chilling discovery was made. James Taylor's body showed unusually high levels of arsenic. In fact, the levels were 60 times higher than what would be normal, which made it clear that something was amiss. At the time, no one suspected foul play, but this new information changed everything. This discovery set off alarm bells for investigators, who began to look back at the deaths surrounding Blanche. James was not the only one. The unexpected death that had once seemed so ordinary now became the first clue in a much larger and darker puzzle. As the investigation progressed, more evidence emerged that pointed to Blanche, and this revelation about James's death would mark the beginning of the end for her. The discovery of arsenic in his system was the first indication of a pattern that would ultimately lead to her conviction and, ultimately, her execution. In the early 1960s, Blanche Taylor Moore was married to her first husband, James Taylor. However, in 1962, Blanche began an affair with Raymond Reid, a married man who worked as a store manager at the same grocery chain where Blanche was employed. Their relationship started off as professional, but over time it developed into a secret affair. Raymond Reid was a divorced father, and he and Blanche became close over the years. As Blanche's marriage deteriorated, her bond with Raymond grew stronger, and by the mid-1970s, they had been seeing each other for years. Blanche's marriage to James was strained, and by 1973, she had grown increasingly distant from him. James's unexpected death that same year, officially ruled a heart attack, would provide Blanche with the perfect opportunity to be with Raymond without the need to hide their relationship any longer. But what seemed like an ordinary, natural death would later be revealed to be the first in a series of poisonings tied to Blanche. After James's death, Blanche's affair with Raymond Reid continued. However, during the mid-1980s, Raymond's health began to decline, starting with vague flu-like symptoms such as nausea, vomiting, and weakness. Raymond was initially treated for what doctors thought was a simple viral infection or gastrointestinal illness, but his condition worsened. By the end of 1985, Raymond was hospitalized repeatedly, suffering from severe fatigue, muscle weakness, and gastrointestinal distress. Doctors struggled to pinpoint the cause of his symptoms and gave him several misdiagnoses, including Guillain-Barré syndrome, a rare disorder that attacks the nervous system. Blanche, ever the manipulator, continued her relationship with Raymond, all the while serving him food and drinks during his stays in the hospital. At some point during these visits, she allegedly began to poison him with small doses of arsenic, a slow-acting and insidious poison that can cause symptoms similar to food poisoning or the flu, just like those Raymond had been experiencing. It was this slow accumulation of arsenic that contributed to Raymond's rapidly declining health. By the spring of 1986, Raymond's condition had become so severe that he was unable to work. He had lost significant weight and was frequently nauseous and fatigued. He became bedridden, unable to perform even basic tasks. Despite these symptoms, Blanche remained calm, showing concern for Raymond's well-being, while in reality, she was the one causing his misery. On October 7, 1986, after months of hospital visits and worsening health, Raymond Reed passed away at the age of 50. His death was initially ruled as Guillain-Barré syndrome, a diagnosis that seemed to fit the symptoms at the time. The doctors had no reason to suspect foul play, and Blanche, once again, appeared as the grieving partner, devastated by the loss. However, years later, after Blanche's arrest and investigation into her past relationships, Raymond Reed's body was exhumed. Toxicology tests revealed that Raymond had been poisoned with arsenic. The levels found in his body were exceptionally high, confirming that he had been slowly poisoned over time. This was the turning point in the investigation. What had once seemed like a tragic illness was now proven to be another calculated murder. The fact that Blanche had been the one closest to Raymond during his illness and had access to his food and medications made her the prime suspect. Investigators began to see a disturbing pattern of deaths surrounding Blanche, all involving men who were close to her. Raymond's death, once thought to be an unexplained medical mystery, was now understood as part of Blanche's deadly scheme. Raymond's slow, agonizing death was the result of deliberate poisoning, and his passing would eventually contribute to Blanche's conviction and death sentence. The deaths surrounding Blanche Taylor Moore were initially seen as isolated tragedies, freak accidents, or natural causes. But as investigators began to piece together the facts, a chilling pattern started to emerge. Blanche's father, Parker Davis Kaiser Sr., passed away suddenly in 1966. His death, attributed to a heart attack, seemed nothing out of the ordinary. But years later, when his body was exhumed, toxicology tests revealed a startling discovery. Arsenic was found in his system. Not in trace amounts, but enough to suggest foul play. This was the first sign that something far more sinister was at work. The pattern grew more disturbing when Blanche's mother-in-law, Isla Taylor, also passed away. Her death was deemed natural, but after an exhumation, arsenic was again found in her body. Though the levels weren't as lethal as in her father's case, they were still present, raising serious questions. The real shock came when authorities re-examined the death of Blanche's first husband, James Napoleon Taylor. His sudden death in 1973 had been ruled a heart attack. But arsenic poisoning was found in his tissues when his body was tested years later. He too had fallen victim to the slow, methodical poisoning that had started to define Blanche's relationships. And then there was Raymond Reid, Blanche's long-term lover. Raymond's mysterious illness in 1986 baffled doctors, who initially diagnosed him with Guillain-Barré syndrome. But when his body was exhumed, the truth emerged. High levels of arsenic confirmed that Blanche had poisoned him as well, just like the others. With each death, the truth became undeniable. Blanche had been systematically poisoning those closest to her. This emerging pattern, each death tied to arsenic, exposed a chilling truth about Blanche's cold, calculated actions, and it would ultimately seal her fate. In 1989, Blanche Taylor Moore married Reverend Dwight Moore, a kind-hearted pastor from a small community in North Carolina. The marriage seemed like a fresh start, but soon after their wedding, Dwight's health took a mysterious and troubling turn. At first, it was just mild discomfort, nausea, fatigue, and weakness, but these symptoms worsened quickly. Dwight found himself struggling to even get out of bed. His condition baffled doctors who initially diagnosed him with Guillain-Barré syndrome. But as his health continued to decline, the answers remained elusive. By January 1986, Dwight's condition had deteriorated to the point where he couldn't keep food down and was losing weight rapidly. Multiple hospital visits and treatments failed to improve his health. It wasn't until doctors began to suspect poisoning that the truth started to emerge. Tests revealed shockingly high levels of arsenic in his system, enough to kill him. As investigators began to connect the dots, they discovered a chilling fact. Blanche had requested that Dwight buy an arsenic-based pesticide called anti-ant, a substance that could easily be used as poison. What's more, Blanche had tried to alter Dwight's pension plan to name herself as the primary beneficiary, a clear financial motive. Dwight's survival was a miracle, but his battle wasn't over. The poisoning left permanent damage, leaving him with tremors and weakness in his legs, a painful reminder of how close he came to death. His near-death experience triggered a full investigation into Blanche's past, and the evidence quickly began to point to her involvement in a disturbing pattern of poisoning. Dwight's survival wasn't just a close call. It became the key piece in unraveling the dark truth about Blanche Taylor Moore. Blanche Taylor Moore's methodical poisoning of those closest to her spanned years, not moments. The timeline of her crimes was one of slow and deliberate actions, carefully calculated to avoid detection. It all began with her father, Parker Davis Kaiser Sr., whose sudden death in 1966 was ruled a heart attack. But when his body was exhumed, high levels of arsenic were discovered, suggesting a slow poison was at work. The same pattern emerged with Blanche's first husband, James Napoleon Taylor, in 1973. His death, also ruled a heart attack, was later linked to arsenic poisoning after his body was tested years later. Blanche's mother-in-law, Isla Taylor, died under similar circumstances in 1981, and when her body was tested, arsenic was again found. The pattern was starting to emerge, but it wasn't until the death of Blanche's lover, Raymond Reid, in 1986 that the poisonings became undeniable. Initially thought to be a rare disease, Raymond's death was later confirmed to be the result of arsenic poisoning. Forensic analysis revealed that Blanche's victims had been poisoned gradually over time, with arsenic accumulating in their systems. The symptoms, fatigue, weakness, nausea, seemed harmless at first, giving Blanche the perfect cover. But the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. Blanche Taylor Moore's methodical poisoning of those closest to her spanned years, not moments. The timeline of her crimes was one of slow and deliberate actions, carefully calculated to avoid detection. It all began with her father, Parker Davis Kaiser Sr., whose sudden death in 1966 was ruled a heart attack. But when his body was exhumed, high levels of arsenic were discovered, suggesting a slow poison was at work. The same pattern emerged with Blanche's first husband, James Napoleon Taylor, in 1973. His death, also ruled a heart attack, was later linked to arsenic poisoning after his body was tested years later. Blanche's mother-in-law, Isla Taylor, died under similar circumstances in 1981, and when her body was tested, arsenic was again found. The pattern was starting to emerge, but it wasn't until the death of Blanche's lover, Raymond Reid, in 1986 that the poisonings became undeniable. Initially thought to be a rare disease, Raymond's death was later confirmed to be the result of arsenic poisoning. Forensic analysis revealed that Blanche's victims had been poisoned gradually over time, with arsenic accumulating in their systems. The symptoms, fatigue, weakness, nausea, seemed harmless at first, giving Blanche the perfect cover. But the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. As Blanche Taylor Moore's trial approached, her defense team introduced a letter that seemed poised to change the entire direction of the case. The letter, purportedly written by a homeless man named Garvin Thomas, was a confession in which Thomas allegedly admitted to poisoning Raymond Reid and taking responsibility for other deaths connected to Blanche. This confession was a shocking twist, suggesting that Moore had been wrongfully accused and that someone else had carried out the crimes. The defense presented this letter as the key piece of evidence that would exonerate Blanche. The narrative it created painted Thomas as the true culprit, with Moore merely a victim of circumstances. But this claim quickly began to unravel under scrutiny. The prosecution, prepared for this dramatic defense, brought in forensic experts to analyze the authenticity of the letter. The letter was examined by document experts who compared it to known samples of Moore's handwriting. The results were clear. The handwriting in the letter was a match for Moore's, not Thomas's. The supposed confession, instead of casting doubt on Moore's guilt, served only to reinforce the evidence against her. The forensics exposed the letter as a fabrication, an attempt by the defense to divert attention from Blanche's involvement. Instead of clearing her name, the letter became a telling indication of her manipulation, only adding to the weight of the case against her. As the truth of the forged confession came to light, it left little room for doubt. This failed attempt to mislead the court proved to be a turning point in the trial, making Blanche's guilt even more apparent. The trial of Blanche Taylor Moore was a highly charged and emotional event that captivated the public's attention. From the moment the proceedings began, it was clear that prosecutors had built a powerful case against her. They presented a wealth of forensic evidence and witness testimony, piece by piece, establishing a chilling pattern of poisoning that spanned years. The evidence was overwhelming and methodical, with each new revelation bringing Blanche's guilt closer to light. Witnesses, including nurses and family members, took the stand and shared their devastating accounts. Blanche's own loved ones spoke about the changes they had witnessed in her behavior, recounting how she manipulated and deceived those closest to her. They described how Blanche had gone to great lengths to hide her actions, pretending to be a caring wife and mother, while secretly poisoning her victims. Family members recalled moments where Blanche seemed oddly detached from the suffering of those around her, raising suspicion, but never providing answers. Forensic experts testified about the arsenic found in the bodies of Blanche's victims, including Raymond Reid, whose slow decline had been misdiagnosed as a rare illness. The jury heard about the gradual accumulation of arsenic in her victims' bodies and how it matched the timeline of events. Each piece of forensic evidence painted a picture of a woman who had methodically, over years, poisoned the men closest to her. As the trial progressed, the emotional toll on the courtroom was palpable. The victims' families shared their heartache, and the prosecution methodically laid out how Blanche had slowly taken the lives of the people she was supposed to love. The jury was left with no reasonable doubt that Blanche had orchestrated these deaths over time. It wasn't just a single act of murder, it was a series of carefully calculated moves designed to eliminate her victims one by one. In the end, the weight of the evidence was too much to ignore. Blanche Taylor Moore was convicted of first-degree murder for the poisoning death of Raymond Reid. The verdict brought some closure to the families who had suffered at her hands, but it also underscored the cold, calculating nature of her crimes. The trial revealed the depth of Blanche's deception and manipulation, solidifying her role in these tragic events. Her conviction marked the beginning of the end for her long reign of deceit. After her conviction, Blanche Taylor Moore was transferred to the North Carolina Correctional Institution for Women in Raleigh, where she began serving her sentence. The trial had ended with the jury recommending the death penalty, and she was formally sentenced on January 18, 1991. Inside prison, Moore's daily existence became one of routine, confinement, and legal maneuvering. She maintained her claim of innocence from the start, insisting she did not commit the crimes for which she was convicted. Her legal team pursued multiple appeals, challenging aspects of the trial, the evidence, and the fairness of her sentencing. Her case drew intense public interest. She became known as the oldest woman on death row in North Carolina, a fact that turned her situation into a subject of media debate and commentary on the justice system. Many wondered whether she would live out her remaining years behind bars rather than face execution. Years following her imprisonment, she has been treated for cancer, undergoing both chemotherapy and radiation therapy. Her advanced age has added further complexity. Born in 1933, she faces the realistic possibility of spending the rest of her life in prison rather than seeing her sentence carried out. While her legal path remains unresolved and the families of her victims continue to seek closure, Moore continues to uphold her assertion of innocence. Despite the gravity of her sentence and the length of her incarceration, she remains engaged in the appeals process, and in her own way, her situation continues to generate public fascination and debate. The case of Blanche Taylor Moore captured the nation's attention not simply because of the crime, but because of the unsettling contrast between her outward appearance and the evidence brought against her. In the small towns of North Carolina, she was known as a church-going grandmother figure, a steady employee, someone who seemed utterly unremarkable. Behind that facade lay a trail of poisoned lives that challenged every assumption about innocence and evil. As the trial unfolded, media outlets gave her the nickname Black Widow, a label born of her repeated proximity to unexplained deaths and her connection to multiple victims. The public was drawn into the story. How could a person who looked so ordinary have perpetrated such profound betrayal? The question haunted many viewers, perhaps because it made them wonder how well we know the people around us. In courtrooms and living rooms alike, people asked themselves, was it greed that led Blanche to act? Prosecutors argued that she stood to gain financially through wills and life insurance. Was it vengeance, some dark urge to punish those she'd loved and left behind? Or was it something deeper, a need for control, a cold calculation that masked itself behind domestic calm? And then there is the most troubling question of all. How does someone who appears so harmless commit such acts? How does trust become weapon? How does care become threat? The families of victims, those who lost husbands, fathers, lovers, watched as documents were presented, letters were forged, and the facade cracked. Now, I want to ask you, what do you believe motivated her? Was it money, revenge, or something else entirely? Could someone so unassuming really orchestrate such betrayal? Or is there something about our assumptions of kindness that leaves us vulnerable? Share where you're watching from and what time it is there, and tell us why you may not yet have subscribed. What needs to change? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Blanche Taylor Moore isn't just guilty of poisoning people. She's the perfect example of how society's obsession with appearances blinds us to real danger. Here's the real issue. Why are we so quick to trust people who fit the mold of harmless? The friendly neighbor, the churchgoer, the grandmother. Isn't this exactly why we have a culture of denial, where people like her can slip through the cracks and harm others? Think about it. Why do we still think someone who looks good can't commit these atrocities? The real question is, how many Blanche Taylors are out there, right now, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, disguised as the kind, trustworthy people we all want to believe in? And here's the thing. Was Blanche just a cold-blooded killer? Or are we all complicit in turning a blind eye to those who don't fit the stereotype of a murderer? Her case isn't just about a woman poisoning people. It's about us failing to see the monsters hiding in plain sight. Isn't the truth a little scarier than we want to admit? What does it say about us that we're willing to believe she was just a victim of circumstances, instead of confronting the real horror that anyone, anywhere, could be capable of this kind of betrayal? Tell me what you think. Would you be surprised if there were more people like her still walking among us? Would we even notice? Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting and even more intriguing as can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.